When it comes to police accountability, I think that press conference that Mike Freeman gave, the way he talked about George Floyd's murder, it hadn't been charged or convicted yet. The way he talked about it, I remember we had a text chain among our prosecutors, and one of the prosecutors who lives in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, said, Minneapolis is going to burn tonight. And it did. Why? Because people felt like the top prosecutor, Mike Freeman, wasn't understanding the gravity of the situation. And even if this very damning evidence was presented right in front of him, people wouldn't, he wouldn't do it. He would just, I don't know, follow the blue line, whatever. And I think that's why trust is so important. And people trusted Keith Ellison more.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
Calling out tap people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
How is the campaign going?
Good.
Yeah. What is it like campaigning in a big place like Hennepin County? It's like 1.26 million people, according to Google. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And when did the campaign start?
We started in November, the second week after the elections. We thought we'd give people a 1-week reprieve from the Minneapolis elections. And then running for Hennepin County, it's, I guess, a lot of people, but I worked in politics before I had a career in law. So I'm used to traveling throughout the country and having to get votes from multiple states. So, I mean,
you have like 2 months to talk to 1 million people. Before we get too far in, I'm going to introduce the show. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm John Edwards, your host, and my guest today is Saraswati Singh, running for Hennepin County Attorney.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, John.
So why are you running for Hennepin County Attorney? Just very simply, what prompted you to do this?
I live here. I'm worried about public safety and police accountability and racial equity. And I'm the only prosecutor in the race. And I know because I live here, I want someone who's going to be Hennepin County Attorney. That job is to be the top prosecutor for the county. I want someone who knows how to do the job and knows how to do it well and has the skills and the experience to bring to that job, because it's going to get a lot of scrutiny, continued scrutiny. And I want the next person in there to bring some skills that the previous occupant didn't have.
Right. And you're a prosecutor with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, right?
That's right. I work with John Choi in Ramsey County.
Are you a fan of John Choi?
I am.
Because there was a prosecutor who left the office recently, I saw in the news, who was very critical of John Choi. So I wonder where you stand in that debate.
Yeah, Rick Dusterhoft. He was the head of our criminal division, so he was one of the people I reported to. There were a few people in between. He's, I think, probably like an old guard prosecutor. Not probably, he is. And a big Trump supporter. And I think he just had a different view of prosecution.
Right.
And I know John Choi, like in his management circle, likes to have diverse voices, and that includes folks that are more conservative than him. And Rick Dusterhoff was that. But, you know, I can understand why Rick left. He's gone over to be a prosecutor in Arizona, I think in Maricopa County, and that might be a better fit for him.
Right. So coming out of 2021, public safety politics was very hot, very emotional, lots of fear and anger. And it felt like police versus the city council in some ways. You had the mayor on one side, the police on one side, the city council on the other. And it feels like we're shifting a little, and I can sense this around the country too, where police are critical of prosecutors, blaming, for example, a little bit of it is coming Mike Freeman's way recently from Hennepin County police chiefs.
Mhm.
I don't know if it sticks as well to Mike Freeman, partly because he's on his way out and he has a little bit of a conservative DFL reputation. But as you say, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. And I wonder, since you are a prosecutor, what your assessment of that police criticism is. The idea that maybe there's a revolving door, or bail isn't set high enough, or violent crimes aren't being prosecuted. Are any of these accurate? Like, how do you assess that criticism?
Sure. I think things are not working well right now because the pandemic hit, right? And after the pandemic hit, and then also George Floyd was murdered, since then, violence has jumped throughout the whole country. Crime has increased throughout the whole country. And I think it's a factor of the pandemic and also people losing trust in police and government. And things are not going as well as they normally are right now. And so what happens when people know that things aren't going well? They blame each other, right? They're pointing fingers. And I mean, the probably most accurate thing is we all have a piece of the blame. We all have responsibility for where things are at, but we also are kind of in an impossible situation. I can tell you that, like, from the government perspective, there's public safety and public health. And so there's folks that are normally would be in jail or prison. Those are two different things. That are walking out on the street. Why? Because of public health, right? COVID, and people were getting sick and dying in jails and prisons, and I believe that's still happening. And now vaccines are made available, but governments don't want to be accountable for if someone dying or getting sick from COVID while someone's in custody. It's just a complicated situation, public health and public safety.
Have you watched some of the media coverage of or read the criticism? Like, I'm curious specifically about some of the criticism leveled at John Choi, who's your boss, and Mike Freeman. If you think, and I feel like I just asked this question, but maybe I wasn't satisfied with the answer. If that criticism is valid, like talking systemically from the prosecutor side, how is the prosecution side failing, or the courts? How is that failing, would you say?
And so I'll go deeper into the answer because I think that's what you were looking for. Because
Right.
I have read the criticism, and there was an article just again yesterday about there was a convening with prosecutors and law enforcement and the community, and law enforcement pointing fingers at prosecutors saying, we're not charging enough cases, we're not asking to keep people in custody, things like that. And prosecutors responding back, we can only prosecute when we have enough evidence to proceed on a case. And there's another piece to it. I know we act like prosecutors have all the power in the world, but we don't. We appear in front of judges, right? So prosecutors and defense attorneys argue in front of a judge. And I do this routinely, every workday, basically, arguing to keep certain people in custody and arguing to keep some people, release them with conditions of release. Well, there's many people that are being released that I don't want released right now, right? They're violent. I have concerns because they've picked up 2 or 3 new cases, and the new cases are getting more serious, or they're not learning from their actions. But judges are releasing them. It depends on which judge you appear in front of. And there's certain legal standards, but the prosecutors don't have all the power,
Right.
and it's a system. It requires there's a lot of pieces to it. And I think the way out of this problem is to accept that, everyone has valid concerns, and that with police, it's important for them to make some changes, because they may not like some of the changes. And I know police are really unhappy with John Choi, especially with regards to some low-level drug 5 policy and the pretextual stop policy. But we're trying to regain the trust of the community, because law enforcement, when they investigate, who do we talk to? The community, the witnesses. If people won't talk to us, it's hard for us to solve cases. And you're seeing that, right? In Hennepin County, all these murders and shootings, and they're going unsolved, right?
Right.
That's in part, not in whole, but in part because the community doesn't want to talk with the police and they don't trust them.
Yeah. I mean, MPD didn't solve a lot of murders before they lost all those cops, and they're solving even less now. So it feels a little bit like deflection. Let's talk a little bit about your background. I was reading your bio on the website, and the Bronx High School of Science came up.
You know it?
I think I've heard of it. Is it selective?
Yes. You need to take a test to get in. And the school that I was zoned for, it wasn't a good high school, and they would have the Einstein class and just on the top floor, because it was a little violent in the school itself. So the smart kids who actually studied got to go on the top level. And I remember going to the high school just to check it out. Like, I remember seeing someone with their cheeks were slashed by a razor blade by another student. And my family, we don't come from a lot of money, but my parents have always prioritized education because they've seen it as the way out. I didn't believe them as a kid, but it turns out it's true. Anyway, I studied when I was 12 years old all summer long for this test that my math teacher in 6th grade told my mom about, saying, like, she's smart, she'll, like, have her take this test. So I took the test and I got in, and we have, like, the most number of Nobel Prize winners out of all the high schools in the country.
Oh.
We had kids from the Upper East Side. I'm from New York originally. Upper East Side, so the really wealthy kids would come. They would skip their boarding schools to come if they got in, and then all the way from kids in the projects. And I feel very fortunate because I got a great education. My school has always been, Bronx Science has always been like a lightning rod, because back in the day we had a lot of Jewish kids. And the way to get in was by taking a test, and people didn't like that. And then it went on to having a lot of Asian kids, many of whom didn't speak English very well. But all of us went to college except for 1 or 2, which is incredible considering all of our very different backgrounds. Sorry, I'm really excited because people rarely ask me about that.
No, I found it to be a remarkable thing for all those reasons, because doesn't New York have a reputation for a lot of, like, special high schools and taking an exam to go to those special high schools? But that's an unusual. Is that an unusual background for a prosecutor or a lawyer to have? Like, did something happen in your life where you're like, I'm done with science? And I know you have an environmental science degree, and I'm going into the law. Or do you feel like there's some consistency there?
I love science, and I loved it in high school. I didn't like it in college, and I love people. I'm an extrovert, and I love political science and the social sciences. I like helping the world and talking with people to figure out what help they need. And my parents, they wanted me to be a doctor, and, I went to Bronx Science. Why don't you continue studying sciences? But I just, I think it's important to pursue what you're passionate about and you're good at. And there are some topics where both of those intersect. And for me, that's political science. And I minored in environmental science too. So that was a little of the environmental piece, the science piece for me. But yeah. And I actually use some of the sciences as a prosecutor because, for example, murder cases or sexual assault cases, you have to read BCA, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, like various different types of testing, whether it's blood testing, semen, reviewing autopsies and understanding, talking with the medical examiner to understand just exactly what happened and figure out the different pieces. There's science in my day job too.
Okay, it came in handy. It wasn't a
Yeah.
total waste of time. You're at the you're way downstream in terms of the public safety function, right? If society fails, you're kind of at the end of it. So I wonder, and you've talked about how it's not all prosecutors. We don't have all the power. There's judges, there's, city government, state government, federal government, a whole lot of things. You might say a whole lot of things fail, and you kind of, prosecutors and judges are dealing with the end result of that, maybe.
And defense attorneys.
Right. And so, I don't know, what do you do when other systems fail? Like, what power do you have to compensate for the failings of other systems? Can you do that?
Yeah.
How do you fight that as a prosecutor?
You run for office and you talk about your experiences. I mean, that's part of what I'm doing. I think people would be surprised that so many prosecutors are Democrats. Because when society fails, we see them in our cases. What are the types of things that we see? Both from victim side and from defendant side. We see addiction issues, they run rampant. We see poverty. We see mental health issues. And so many times, I handle adult cases. So many times we're like, why didn't anyone do anything earlier? Right? Why didn't, so many of these people, they were in school, right? Why didn't someone do anything? There was something wrong happening at home. Why didn't the teacher, why didn't a bystander, why didn't a neighbor do something? Why wasn't this child put into some programming or tested? Because actually, I was talking with Representative Sandra Feast, and she was saying that they did a study on juveniles that are in custody, and they found out that they were overwhelmingly dyslexic and just really had learning disabilities. And they're really overrepresented in our population. Because what happens if you don't understand what's happening in school all day? You
Right.
just leave, right? And so it's tough because so many times as prosecutors, I mean, we have tools and we're slowly getting even more tools. And it's great because prison is appropriate in cases, but sometimes what we do is offer treatment. In terms of Minnesota's sentencing compared to states around us here in the Midwest, we're pretty lenient. And so for drug cases, you're going to get probation, especially if you have no priors. And even if you do have a few criminal history points, you're probably not going to get prison, at least. But we spend so much time sending people to treatment, and it kind of feels late in the game. Like, why didn't people do things beforehand? Because I'll give you an example of what we see. So many times we'll see they'll have some drug convictions, right? And then we'll see some thefts. Because what happens when someone is addicted, not all people, but a portion, right? When they're addicted, they need money for drugs. And then maybe their family doesn't know what to do, or they've stolen from their family and their family's like, you know what, I can't deal with this. So they're out on the street, they're homeless, and they steal from someone's garage. And they sell the equipment, the power tools at the garage to get drugs. So now they're charged with theft, and they do that over and over and over again. We see so many of these types of cases where they steal from someone's garage or unattached garage. and it becomes a theft or a burglary. They're not targeting anyone in particular. They're really just focused on taking property and selling it to feed their addiction. And we just have so many of those cases. It's just, I think, a failing of society that we haven't really addressed addiction issues and 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 made it so that people don't feel shame for getting help, but feel rewarded for the courage to get help when they need it, you know?
Right. What are you looking forward to doing differently from the current regime at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office? You describe yourself as a progressive attorney, progressive prosecutor. So when you come in, what are some things you'd like to come in and change?
Sure. So my three main priorities, and they're of equal value. The first is public safety, specifically violent crimes. Everyone deserves to feel safe, and everyone deserves to be safe. And I know a lot of people are scared right now, but I think law enforcement is in part correct. It's the same people doing the most violent crimes over and over again. So I think focusing our resources and trying to get those people into custody and prosecuting them, and making sure they stay in custody, right? Especially if they're doing violent things over and over again, like carjackings over and over again. And drive-by shootings. These are really serious, right? And most people don't do these types of behaviors, but the same people keep doing it over and over again. I'd like to move resources there. And also the murder rate has skyrocketed, and I've handled murder cases. We need to make sure that we're investigating them well. And as a prosecutor, part of your job is reviewing the investigation and deciding whether to charge it. And then also asking investigators, even after it's charged, oh, we just discovered this other piece that might be missing. Can you go and find out go interview some more witnesses? Some names just came up. Can you find out if there's something to it? Or the defense attorney mentioned this other thing. Can you go check? This might be an important piece. These are very time-intensive cases, so I want to move resources over there. And where do I want to take them from? I want to take them from the low-level drug cases. Hennepin County is they're not doing things like we are in Ramsey County. And they're also still prosecuting marijuana cases. And I don't see many of those low-level cases as having a public safety risk. And we have plenty of cases where there is a public safety risk. So I want to move those resources over. And it's a double whammy because my third prong is racial equity. And what do we know about low-level drug cases? They've done studies, right? And they normally only say if someone's white or black. They don't question people of all other ethnicities and races like indigenous or Hispanic or Asian. But these studies show that people that are white, that identify as white, use drugs at a slightly higher rate than people that are black. But you come into Hennepin County, any county in Minnesota, you'll see most of the people that are charged with low-level drug possession. So just a small amount for personal use. You're not going to be selling that amount. It's tiny. It's mostly people of color. And so I think you do a double whammy. Focus your resources where the public safety is greatest, and also reducing the racial disparity in our system, because I think prosecuting drug cases, that's where some of the greatest disparity occurs, right? The Nixon war on drugs that was implemented way back in the day, this Republican policy, we're still doing it.
So let's talk about big old populous Hennepin County again. When I watched the news, I saw a story about, I think it may have been Minnetonka. Somebody was going through the neighborhood rifling through cars. It's like, that's irritating, but I'm surprised it's on the local news. And it struck me that the concerns in Minneapolis compared to the concerns in Edina, the concerns in Minnetonka, there's a huge difference in what the crime is. And a lot of that has to do with levels of poverty. Like a poverty map is a crime map, basically. And so how do you, I mean, there's competing concerns. Minnetonka probably wants you to throw the book at the people who are rifling through cars, stealing change and whatever valuable happens to be laying around in the car. Whereas in Minneapolis, mostly the concern is like carjackings and murders. How do you balance those competing interests?
You talk with everyone, and when you're a prosecutor, your job is to do justice. And what does that involve? It involves reviewing the evidence of the case, the circumstances, because we do weigh, right? What was the actual crime committed? Is someone rifling through a car, or are they stealing the car, right? There's a difference. And there are different charges that we can do in those cases. You can't just charge whatever you want. And based on those charges, it's set by the Minnesota sentencing guidelines what a person can receive. And so we have limitations within the law. And so I would listen to everyone. And I do that in my cases, right? You listen to the victims. If the victim is from a suburban area and they're really upset about someone rifling through their car, you listen to them and you take that into account as how you proceed with the case. Sometimes in our cases, victims just want an apology. And, these are things that we talk with our victims about and we take them into account when we're deciding whether to offer a plea deal, and if so, what kind, whether to take it to trial, whether to have aggravating factors, so ask for a more serious sentence. Doesn't mean we'll get it, but we'll ask the judge for it. Honestly, it just means talking with everyone. Is everyone going to be happy? Not necessarily. But I think everyone wants the same thing. They want to feel safe. And I think if they see their Hennepin County attorney focusing on where the violent crime is happening and actually addressing that, because the thing is, I know people think suburbia is nice and crime-free. It's not. We've seen murders skyrocket, but you know what else we've seen skyrocket during the pandemic? Domestic assaults. That happens everywhere. Our domestic assault calendars are they're unbelievable. And they happen everywhere. And they happen among people of all different socioeconomic classes. And I know it can be hard for people to wrap their head around, especially when they show up in the courtroom. Oh, but I'm a CEO. No, you do this behavior and it's prevalent throughout our whole county. And the number of murders stemming from domestic assaults has skyrocketed too during the pandemic. These things, they happen everywhere, even if you don't think they don't happen in your community. But that doesn't mean you should feel scared. You should just want a Hennepin County attorney who knows these things and then prosecutes those cases in a way that's appropriate and fair and in accordance with the law and takes into account what your feelings are. Because that's our job. There's the Victims' Rights Act. We have to talk with the victim. That's part of our job as a prosecutor. And they passed the Victim Rights Act because previously people were concerned that we weren't taking into account victims' feelings. So we'll take them into account, and victims have a chance at sentencing to give their victim impact statement. It's a pretty critical part of the proceedings because we want victims' voices to be heard.
Let's talk about holding police accountable. So
Yeah.
in the last few years with George Floyd's murder by Minneapolis police and then Daunte Wright's killing in Brooklyn Center by Kim Potter, Keith Ellison has taken on that role as Attorney General. The state has taken that on. Typically, it is the county attorneys who prosecute police, right?
Typically, so I used to work at the Minnesota Attorney General's office before I came over to Ramsey County. And under the previous Attorney General, that was Lori Swanson, there was a criminal division, but she had whittled it down quite a bit. And so right now under Keith Ellison, it's growing again, that criminal division. And I think that's a good thing. When it comes to police accountability, I think that press conference that Mike Freeman gave with the current U.S. attorney at the time and other folks in the background, the way he talked about George Floyd's murder hadn't been charged or convicted yet. The way he talked about it, I remember we had a text chain among our prosecutors, and one of the prosecutors who lives in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, said, Minneapolis is going to burn tonight. And it did. Why? Because people felt like the top prosecutor, Mike Freeman, wasn't understanding the gravity of the situation. And even if this very damning evidence was presented right in front of him, people wouldn't, he wouldn't do it. He would just, I don't know, follow the blue line, whatever. And I think that's why trust is so important. And people trusted Keith Ellison more. And I think that's why it was a good thing that the Minnesota Attorney General's office stepped in to work with the Hennepin County Attorney's office. There's prosecutors in the Hennepin County Attorney's office that worked on the Chauvin trial. It was a joint effort. And I think it was a good thing. I think it made it better because there are biases. When you work with the same officers over and over again, you may develop a bias. Other times you don't. You barely know the person. You barely see the person, but people perceive you as having a bias. And especially in a big case like that, where people may not trust you or your office or the leader of your office, I think it's helpful to bring in someone else who can bring trust and transparency and help calm a community down to let them know, okay, we have the evidence, we're looking at it, we're taking it seriously, and we are acknowledging it is what it is. Sometimes that's what you need. And I can tell you, as a prosecutor, having video like that of a murder, that is our dream. That's the type of evidence we want. We don't always have that in murder cases.
So do you think something like the state attorney general taking over police prosecution cases should be just formalized in the standard practice? Because I can imagine a situation where we elect a Republican attorney general who is not eager at all to hold police accountable. So does it continue to be this thing happening on a case-by-case basis, or should it be formalized?
That's a really good question, because you're right? Because what if Doug Wardlow ended up being Minnesota Attorney General? And I think he would have a different approach. So I'm going to give you the lawyer answer, which is it depends. So police officers, they're just like everyone else. I used to not believe it, but they are. They get DWIs, right? You have the sheriff that just got one. They get into trouble. They get into drunken fistfights. They do all the things that regular people do, right? And prosecutors prosecute them. But for the lower level cases, many times we don't conflict them out because typically law enforcement will just plead and be like, okay, I'll just admit it and then, try to get this over with. Like, this is really embarrassing that this happened. But when there's an officer involved shooting or murder, I think those cases require extra scrutiny, and something that the county attorneys have done here locally, and this is a contentious issue among the County Attorneys Association, is working with each other to see, hey, if I have a case where I think for public trust purposes, it might be helpful for someone else to look at the evidence, someone else who doesn't have a relationship with this officer, to do that review. I think that makes sense. So to me, it depends. And so depends whether the Attorney General's office might be a good fit in reviewing case or another county attorney and another county attorney's office. I mean, this happens routinely. There's an agreement actually within a few of the county attorneys here where we do that for various different cases.
I'm concerned because I think we've come to the end. I don't usually end an episode this early. It makes me feel like I did something wrong.
No. Is there anything else that you want to know about me?
I mean, I was very interested in the Bronx High School of Science thing, and we covered that. We did the science. How about this? Is there anything else about you that we need to know?
Yes, it's a really good question. So you asked me at the very beginning why I'm running for Hennepin County Attorney. And I gave you the logical answer, but there's another reason why I'm running. So I grew up reading Nancy Drew books and comic books and Amar Chitra Katha, which are Indian comic books. So I love justice, right? And doing the right thing. And that's your job as a prosecutor, to do justice. And that's something I'm trying to teach as part of my campaign, what work we actually do. But while I had those wonderful experiences growing up in my life, at the same time, I've had family experiences that were not good. My grandfather was a diplomat, so he worked at the United Nations, and he had a prestigious job, right? He was a diplomat. This was in the 1960s. And when he went to the water fountain, there was the white water fountain and the colored water fountain. And he would have to go to the color water fountain because his skin color was more important than his credentials. And then my dad, after 9/11, just a regular citizen called the police on him. He was going to the store to buy a newspaper. He loves newspapers. And the civilian called the police on him and said he was a terrorist. No basis. My dad has darker skin and facial hair, but yeah. And he worked at the post office at the time. It wasn't anything fancy. The police responded and they talked with the woman and they talked with my dad and they let my dad go, which was the right thing to do. But that was a community member calling the police on my dad. And then there's me. When I was little, I loved playing, especially in the summer, with those water guns. And we had gotten some water guns from the 99-cent store, the ones that are clear plastic, they're green, or they're bright green and bright orange. And I would play with my siblings. And one day, my parents sat me down and said I wasn't allowed to play with it anymore outside because a police officer had shot and killed a little black boy about my age in our county, and it wasn't safe for me to play with them anymore. I'm tired of waiting for things to change. It shouldn't be like this. We should all be able to play with our toy water guns out in the street. We shouldn't just be happy that, okay, we no longer have different water fountains. We still have some of the same issues we've been facing for ages. Every single one of us deserves to feel safe and be safe. And at the same time, we can pursue justice without being racist or engaging in those practices. We can do it in a way that everyone feels cared for and heard. And I'm hoping to change those things as Hennepin County Attorney. And that's why I'm running. I'm tired of waiting. And I don't know if all the candidates get it. I think many of them have wonderful qualities, but this is real. Like, I want change. And I want someone to do the change that knows what they're doing and can ask the right questions and has the right priorities, right? They want everyone to be safe. They don't want violence. And at the same time, they know how to talk to people, know that it's constantly learning, and it's going to be a lot of difficult discussions within the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, but including with other police officers. It's not going to be easy, but it's so important because we need to go through the messy middle in order to come out in a better place. And the world's watching us. I think we can do it. I know we can do it.
Do you think people are tuning in to the county attorney's race? Because it can tend to fly under the radar in a normal year. As not many people paying attention. Do you feel like people are connecting to this race this year?
I think more and more people are connecting to the race, and it's getting a lot more attention than it otherwise would. And why do I say that? So the Star Tribune was calling around and asking about who was running in the Hennepin County Attorney race. And when each of the candidates announced, they ran an article on each of us. That's not typical. You can talk to the other county attorneys. When other county attorneys ran in their races, there was no big article in a major local newspaper on them.
Right.
So, no, go ahead.
Feels like it could be a double-edged sword if it gets negative attention and it's kind of the backlash politics of 21 bleed into 22. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like scrutiny and attention doesn't always work out. Depending on how the media coverage goes, it's a lot of very bad TV news coverage of criminal justice. A lot of good stuff too, but I don't know. I'm constantly worried about the backlash. Are you feeling the backlash?
Oh, I feel it. I was door knocking last year, and I'd been door knocking the last few years, but I could tell that there was a shift. And also from my jury trials, I could tell from the jury pools, because the year George Floyd was murdered, there was so much distrust against police, against prosecutors. There were a lot more acquittals, even on cases where the evidence was strong. And then now it's swinging the other direction. And I think you're right about scrutiny. It's a double-edged sword. And the thing is, you want it to be talked about carefully and in a balanced way. And I think these issues are so emotional, right? People get hurt. People are scared. Fear can just make people have all this anxiety. But it can sometimes make you lose track of what is really there. And what's really there is a more complicated picture and more nuanced, and it requires understanding the system and understanding the numbers and the people. And it's hard to capture that. And everyone's not going to understand that. And so that extra scrutiny, right? Someone might do some clickbait and all these people will be like, oh my goodness, this is awful. And we see that actually as prosecutors all the time. Our cases are in the news and people will be horrified. Why did the prosecutor do this? Well, the thing is, we get to see all this evidence and we get to talk with the victim. And we also our job as a prosecutor is to focus on the victim, the defendant, and the community. And there's an inherent tension there, right? And then we get to review evidence that other people out in the public don't get to see, because we might have a weak case or we might have a strong case, but the defendant is terminally ill. I mean, these are things that really do happen, right? And so you might think as an outsider, oh my God, this was awful, but you don't have all the information. And much of that information is confidential for good reason. There's a lot of sensitive things that we see. And sometimes the victim wants that resolution, and you might vehemently disagree with it, but the crime happened to the victim, and the victim wanted an apology, and they wanted treatment instead, and wanted us to come up with a creative solution. I mean, these dynamics here, like, they're complicated, and it can be very easy to say, oh my goodness, what happened here is wrong. But the real story is far more complicated. And I think if people actually knew what we did and the process and how many people's views we took into consideration and the investigations that we did and the mental health evaluations that we do, the treatment evaluations that we do, all the many different pieces, the criminal history points that people outside of the legal community don't understand, you would realize that we're trying to do justice, and I think we usually do a decent job of it. But right now with the pandemic, we're really struggling. And I think people have the right idea that they want things to be better, and I think it will be better. And I hope in part that will begin by getting vaccinated and getting our public health under control, because then we can have jury trials again. And people will actually feel like the laws that we have, when they're broken, we're actually enforcing them. Something will actually happen. And the courts have been shut down for quite a bit, and they've been remote for quite a bit.
I don't think that's talked about very much in the news about how the courts aren't operating.
Yeah, actually, I was just at the. I love shopping at my Seward Co-op, and there was a newspaper stand, and there was an article from the Minnesota County Attorneys Association. Well, an article that cited the Minnesota County Attorneys Association. Bob Smalls, the executive director, who used to be a judge, and he was saying how there's this pressure among prosecutors to resolve a lot of cases, a lot of criminal cases, because there's so many. And the thing is, and when the courts were shut, they were shut down for months. Like everything just stopped. And we didn't have Zoom at the beginning. And then, I mean, courts are old fashioned, right? So like getting things up and running, especially judges that are not used to technology and even prosecutors and defense attorneys, it took a while to get up and running. And even then it wasn't ideal. There's all these defendants that, I mean, some of it might be legitimate. They have difficulty accessing the technology or good Wi-Fi. Some of them, you can fake it, right? Oh, I'm having tech troubles. Don't know about this warrant. Don't know, And then we've been having these remote hearings and we started to have trials, but they're nowhere near the same level as they were before. We had to reconfigure the courtrooms and only certain ones could fit the criteria of having having 6 feet apart between each person, getting filtration systems. Like there are just so many pieces. And then last winter we had to shut down again because even with those precautions, people were just getting sick. We were having trials and then the defense attorney would get sick or a juror would get sick and you need everyone to do the trial. And I wonder what's going to happen right now because it's getting bad again. And a jury, you need to pull up a pool of jurors, right? And people have conditions, right? Some people are at risk. I had a trial last year. I actually struck her because she had a kidney transplant and she was at higher risk and she came in for jury duty anyway. And I was like, if she gets sick from COVID, this is
So what should you do if you have a health issue and you get called for jury duty? Can you call in and say, hey, I probably shouldn't come in, I have a health issue? Or do you really have to come in?
They ask you about that. And the jury office is being far more, they have new protocols in place. So you can ask to have it pushed out further out and you can let them know that you have like an underlying condition. Because there are people that are going through chemo, for example, right? We don't want you to show up for jury duty. I mean, you should talk with the jury duty office first, of course, but if you are going to get sick and possibly die, that's in no one's benefit, right? There are other jurors that are available that don't have that health condition. So it's really important for people to tell their health conditions and be honest about it. Don't fake them. There's plenty of people that would be happy to do that, but be honest about it. And I think we're very reasonable about that because we really don't want jurors to get sick. A jury's job is to determine whether someone is guilty or not guilty. And then from there, the rest of us do work on other stuff. There's a complicated process. But that decision of guilty or not guilty, we don't want you to lose your life for that.
Right. Let's promote the caucus because that's what you're focused on right now is the DFL endorsement process, right?
Yeah, I am.
So the caucus is February 1st.
Correct.
And that's across Hennepin County. I know on the Minneapolis DFL website, you can register. If you can't attend, you can register on the website as a non-attendee. But have I promoted it adequately?
You have.
Caucus participation instructions have changed since this episode was recorded. For the most up-to-date information and non-attendee forms, Hennepin County residents should visit caucus.dfl.org and Minneapolis residents should visit minneapolisdfl.org.
I think the online process went pretty well in 21 for city offices, so I don't know. Well, Saraswati Singh, candidate for Hennepin County Attorney, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for spending so much of your time with me.
Thank you, John. And my website is saraswatisingh.com. I encourage everyone to go join my campaign. I'm the underdog, but I'm I'm the only prosecutor in the race, and the job is to be the top prosecutor. So I hope you join me.
Thank you. And I'm your host, John Edwards. This has been the Wedge Live podcast.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.